Welcome back to GNN and our continuing coverage of what officials have now deemed an aggressive cyber attack on US communication infrastructure. Communications with financial trading houses are almost at a standstill. Reservation systems for the airlines and other transportation systems are not working at all. We are also now receiving alarming reports of significant and growing power outages in major metropolitan areas in the eastern half of the United States.
There could be widespread panic, especially among people who are losing both their phones and their power.
And then finally, we're going to have to come back.
This newscast might not be real, but the threat of this nightmare scenario is very real. A cyber attack by an enemy state or criminal group could very well cause widespread chaos. Economic collapse, nationwide blackouts, phone lines down across the country. No country is immune, and the world's high-tech superpower is right at the front lines.
Are tied to that computer and communications network for their daily function.
To avoid such a doomsday scenario, the US President Barack Obama is now investing hundreds of billions of dollars to thwart this kind of serious threat.
Our digital networks are critical to our national security, our military superiority, and public safety. But that dependence also makes us vulnerable to cyber attack from those who would do us harm. The lesson is clear. This cyber threat is one of the most serious economic and national security challenges we face as a nation.
The US government is well aware that the cyber war has already begun, and it's a war being waged all over Europe, Asia, and the Americas. It's a conflict where the battlefield is right at the heart of our ultra-connected, high-tech modern world.
If some nation state wanted to attack our electric power grid, or our trains, or our banks, our aviation system, they could.
It's hard to hide 1,000 tanks. It's very easy to hide cyber development activities.
One Chinese official told me, you know, we will never crash Wall Street because we own it, right?
So, in theory, we have the capability of turning out the lights in Beijing, yes. In practice, I don't know, because I don't know what the vulnerabilities of their systems are. But would it be a wise idea? I think we'd have to think several times before we go ahead and answer the question yes.
The first battle in this new kind of war was waged by Russia. No surprise there. By the end of the Cold War, the country decided to embark on a new kind of covert operation to counter the US missile program. And so the KGB began training top-notch IT specialists. Russia's new generation of foot soldiers never even experienced that time period, and they are neither military intelligence nor secret agents. There are 20-somethings, like Konstantin Goloskokov, the architect and chief of staff of the first full-fledged cyber war attack in history. Konstantin heads a group of ultra-nationalist youths linked to the Kremlin, the Nashis, and with the help of his comrades, he attacked Estonia.
Что же касается эффективности, я считаю, что операция в целом была эффективной.
Judging by its overall effectiveness, I would say the Estonia operation was a huge success. And the fact that today, almost 4 years after our attack, people continue talking about it, just shows to what extent we achieved our objective. And so the target was Estonia, a small country from the former Soviet Union that joined NATO back in 2004. In May 2007, the Estonian authorities remove a statue of a Red Army soldier. For Moscow, it's a highly provocative move. And a large-scale attack is unleashed, completely invisible to the naked eye. There are no tanks or planes, and yet it strikes at the heart of the enemy. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Estonia staked everything on new technologies, and they have since then become one of the most high-tech countries in the world. With a simple click, its residents pay their bills and the parking meters fill out their tax returns, go about their bank transactions, elect their members, start a new business, and can access virtually any administrative document. But on August 1st, 2007, Konstantin begins hacking the country's government websites.
Там, на самом деле, я вот в эстонском не силен.
Let me show you. I'm on Estonia's administrative state portal. There must be links to the Defense Ministry, the Ministry of the Interior. We worked on these addresses at the time.
Мы также работали. Ну, я говорю, у них как...
Their sites weren't technically advanced at all, and see, nothing has changed. It's still pretty bad. So in fact, you just simply need to connect to the sites en masse to saturate them. Of course, we also used other complementary programs. What I mean is scripts that were written here by our guys to increase the influx of connections. And so Konstantin and his handful of fellow hackers take control of a network of several thousand hacked computers all over the world, without the users ever even noticing. A system called botnet, commonly used to spread spam, also used by cyber criminals. Konstantin and his team tap into their network of zombie computers to connect all at once to the Estonian government sites, causing them to crash. In addition to official government sites, banking sites, news sites, and e-commerce sites are also paralyzed by this denial of service attack. For several days, the country is brought to its knees. During this time, the entire population has no access to their emails, but panic really starts to set in when bank accounts become inaccessible.
As we see, the goal of these attacks...
The purpose of these attacks was to isolate the country, create insecurity, and it worked.
What was going on, people
wondered what was happening.
Felt really
they felt vulnerable.
By not being able to...
They could not withdraw their money and that sort of thing. My government was faced with something totally unexpected and unforeseeable. Russia declared a cyber war on Estonia. The foreign minister, Urmas Pats, said that the attacks against our government and our newspapers were launched directly from the services of Vladimir Putin. An attack on Estonia is an attack on Europe. I have a list of computers that prove where the attacks against our sites are coming from. If anyone is interested, I can provide this list. The problem is, the list in question really proves nothing, and that's precisely the point. The Russian authorities made use of hackers to cover their tracks, where nothing could be traced to their own services. Andrei Soldatov is a Russian investigative journalist and an expert on Russia's secret service. He closely followed the attack of 2007.
If you need to organize hacker attacks,
If you want to organize a cyber attack, you do not need special equipment or some kind of special skills. It's much more effective to use young people, unconnected to the state. Just give them money and say, attack sites. That's all. You do not need to provide them with material developed by the Secret Service.
Technologies developed by the Secret Services.
Поэтому даже чисто технически власти...
Even from a purely technical standpoint, the Russian authorities could not have been involved in any way. It's a matter of principle. Anyway, it was a question of demonstrating the reaction of our citizens through an action against Estonia, against the Estonian state apparatus.
Значит, структура.
Estonians sought help from their NATO allies. All the while, Russia contended that the computers attacking Estonia were in no fewer than 100 countries, even in Washington, D.C. This is exactly the system of botnets that were created by Konstantin. The attacker remains anonymous, impossible to clearly implicate Russia, and this rogue system will even allow for other kinds of security breaches. As proof, just listen to the answer that a French diplomat received when he questioned his Russian colleague.
La conversation a débouché sur...
The conversation touched on the question of how we can be certain that someone in the Russian government did not pay off a private group based in Russia to carry out the attack, so that when we identify the perpetrator, would Russia be implicated?
Soit accusé. La possibilité d'une attaque dont on ne peut pas connaître.
The possibility of an attack where its sponsor remains unknown makes it extremely difficult for any kind of decisive response.
De prendre des mesures de riposte active.
You know, I think that the Estonia event did surprise everyone, and it made NATO think that, well, they were going to have to take this seriously. And so in the Lisbon Declaration of November 2011, cyber attack was put on a par with nuclear weapons and terrorism.
The speed at which a cyber attack could destabilize an entire country truly frightens Westerners. So it's not a coincidence that in 2009, NATO chooses Estonia to open up its first military base, acting as a cyber defense center for Europe. Right alongside land, air, water, and space, cyberspace now becomes officially a military domain. In a strange way, it's history coming full circle. For it's the US Army in 1969 that invented the internet to connect computers from multiple bases to be able to communicate in the event of a Soviet nuclear attack. Then the network was used by universities before experiencing exponential growth in the 90s, until it eventually conquered the entire world. While hackers quickly found an amazing playground in this sprawling network, they are quickly being replaced by computer scientists and soldiers. As we're about to see, one event will radically change the face of this cyber war. Everything starts here in this suburb of Washington, July 13, 2010. We head to Symantec, one of the world's premier cybersecurity companies. In the sprawling world of the internet, only these kinds of companies are able to track so much online activity in real time. Their clients number in the millions, and all of their clients' computers offer them a constant window into what's happening on the internet networks all over the world. Surveillance capabilities exceed those of any government. This control room observes 9 billion connections per day and detects new viruses every 2 minutes. So when a new virus appears on their screens, one day in the summer of 2010, initially nobody panics.
Initially, it just looked like a very well-designed piece of malicious code targeting primarily the Windows operating system. There were thousands of hosts infected throughout the world. It was a relatively small but very targeted infection. Okay, guys, so we're just having a very important...
Like every time a new virus appears on the World Wide Web, computer scientists give it a name. This one's called Stuxnet. Early analysis shows that this virus has only penetrated tens of thousands of computers across the globe and is considered minimal. But one thing intrigues the computer engineers. This virus is so difficult to detect that it's probably been present on the network undetected for well over a year. We first try to understand where and how this program spreads. And we quickly notice a number of very strange and very new things. We see fairly quickly that it exploits several software flaws. Here we actually see 4. Most of the time with a virus, only one flaw is exploited. 4 is unheard of. Never ever seen that before. Meanwhile, in Moscow, the other big cybersecurity company, a Russian one, Kaspersky, joins in the race to understand this virus. A virus that antivirus programs have been unable to pick up until now. Alex Gostov began his career as a hacker at the age of 15 before being recruited by Kaspersky. Today he's responsible for decoding hundreds of thousands of lines of code from Stuxnet.
This is one of files from Stuxnet. Of course, it looks like, I don't know, Chinese letters, yeah. But if you look in machine codes, it's the same as language. Frankly speaking, I think it was the most sophisticated piece of malware when we've seen in maybe last 20 years. It's spreading part which use vulnerabilities, infect machines, inject code. It's very good hacker jobs. Yeah, hacker works. I think a team of 5 or 6 people, they have maybe 2 very good hackers, and most of the team, it's very good engineers. Yeah. Maybe civil engineers, maybe military engineers, nobody knows.
In early August, the engineers were surprised to discover that Stuxnet was designed to take control of a software created by Siemens, a well-known kind of software that manages industrial equipment in manufacturing and utilities. This catches the engineers by surprise. Viruses are usually created simply to make easy money.
The main question when we analyze most of current malware, it's where is money? And what is reason to create this? And in Stuxnet, there was absolutely no idea where is money in this case.
And so the origin of the attack remains a mystery. Later that month, another major discovery is made. The virus is communicating with an outside source to update and replicate itself. These communications lead to 2 computer servers located in Denmark and Malaysia, servers officially dedicated to football. So then we took control of these servers, and all the connections from all the machines infected by Stuxnet were returning to one server. So we follow the traffic and are alerted to all the infected machines. And that's when we see that the infections were returning from internet addresses that are located in Iran. The engineers discovered that 60% of 100,000 infected computers are in Iran. But the online investigation yields very few clues, just that the virus is targeting Iran, it attacks industrial software, and is linked to anonymous servers. The Stuxnet mystery could have gone on for a long time, had it not been for a statement given September 26, 2010 by Iran's nuclear authorities. On their website, they show that their facilities have been victim of a major cyber attack. Subject to international inspection, the Iranians have no choice but to acknowledge that their uranium production, officially for civil purposes, but perhaps military as well, had collapsed. It's a nuclear plant at Natanz that was targeted, and its valuable centrifuges, acquired in recent years by the Iranians in a hard-fought struggle. The secrets of Stuxnet begin to slowly come to light. The centrifuges are not very massive. They are fairly thin tubes which revolve around the drum wall very rapidly, and the speed of centrifuges must be controlled by computer processors that have a particular function to ensure that this rate remains stable. Here is what Stuxnet does. Stuxnet tackles computer processors that control the speed of centrifuges and make them literally explode. Since these machines are fragile, once one explodes, it will cause the others to explode as well. That's why there are probably 1,000 or at least several hundred centrifuges over a certain period of time that have ceased to function as a direct result of the virus. At the plant, the virus managed to remain dormant for months, allowing it to mutate and then reappear, gradually sabotaging the speed of the centrifuges, all the while sending information to the operators behind their screens indicating that all was well. But the most surprising thing was how a computer virus managed to penetrate ultra-protected computers that were totally disconnected from the global internet network.
They had to use a worm as a delivery device, which has the which they used because they wanted as many infected computers on the outside to maximize the chances that somebody would walk an infected USB stick, memory device, into the inside, so to speak. But the worm delivery device meant that it would replicate. And so there are, at one point, there were something like tens of thousands of computer systems that had been infected by Stuxnet. And a lot of companies that had nothing to do with the Iranian nuclear program had to spend time and money to get the Stuxnet malware off their machines. If they didn't have the problem of trying to cross that gap between the, as it were, the internet-facing system and the closed system, they probably wouldn't have used a worm.
And so it took several months for someone in Iran to eventually use an infected USB flash drive, consciously or not, that we will never know, and access the computer system that controls Iran's nuclear infrastructure. There was not necessarily an intent from that person to harm. To offer a similar example, the computer network at the French Ministry of Defense was compromised from the worm Conficker, although there were elements I was able to recover. The one who put the USB flash drive into the computer system had no intent to harm the computer system of the Ministry of Defense. He had no right to do so, and he was told he had no right to do so. It was simply a question of convenience to transfer a document. So there you go, the mobile digital devices have become so commonplace that he did it without giving it a second thought. According to some estimates, the Stuxnet virus might have set Iran's bomb-making abilities back 2 years. A simple virus damaged a nuclear program that had the world up in arms. In short, an ordinary USB flash drive just might have avoided possible Israeli airstrikes against Iran. And it doesn't stop there. There's a very important psychological message vis-à-vis Iran. There's the physical impact of Stuxnet. 1,000 centrifuges unable to function within a matter of just hours or days. There's also a political message, which is very important. We can return at any time without you ever noticing, and you won't even realize that we are there. Why? Because Stuxnet makes the system believe that everything is operating normally. I think that this political psychological dimension of Stuxnet is perhaps even more significant than the actual physical damage that was caused to the Iranian program.
It's possible to engender a feeling of being penetrated, a feeling that you don't know what's inside your machine. And it's that doubt that your machines are doing what you want them to do that I think can be very effective. Do the Iranians think that they have cleaned it out entirely? Do they have 100% confidence in that? Well, if they don't, you know, think about the process by which they go from, let me stop there. Let me just...
Yeah, that's very interesting. So
No, I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
Martin Libicki might have said just a little too much. He is responsible for the Pentagon's cyber warfare strategy, so he is very well informed. We might not have heard the last of Stuxnet. The creators of the virus are still hidden behind 2 football servers. And nobody has so far claimed responsibility for this cyber attack.
There's only 4 or 5 countries in the world that could build something like Stuxnet, and the US is one of them. But there's no other proof. The Russians, the Chinese, the Israelis, the British certainly have the capability. A few other countries are developing this kind of capability, but right now there is no conclusive proof one way or the other.
Rumors and leaks to the press emphatically point to Israel and the United States. But the fog of war, even more present than in conventional warfare, is a real factor. Yet one thing is certain. For the first time, a new weapon, once confined to military laboratories, has now been used on the ground, and that changes everything. Throughout the world, armies are preparing for this new kind of conflict, and the United States is at the forefront. The National Security Agency, the famous NSA, will spend $30 billion over the next 5 years for cyber war. In Germany, England, France, and China, the cybersecurity centers are recruiting with a vengeance. One thing is certain: other Stuxnet-style viruses are already being created and could be utilized in the near future. And where will the battlefield be? In any one of the world's modern societies. And it worries first and foremost the Americans, the inventors of the internet. 30% of their growth is linked to new technologies. Stuxnet is even the subject of a congressional inquiry. For if an ultra-protected Iranian nuclear plant was hit by a destructive virus, how far can this really go?
Something as simple and innocuous as this becomes a challenge for all of us to maintain accountability and control of our critical infrastructure systems. This actually contains the Stuxnet virus.
Even President Obama himself sounds the alarm.
This world, cyberspace, is a world that we depend on every single day, and the World Wide Web that has made us more interconnected than at any time in human history. It's the great irony of our information age. The very technologies that empower us to create and to build also empower those who would disrupt and destroy. From now on, our digital infrastructure, the networks and computers we depend on every day, will be treated as they should be, as a strategic national asset.
All different kinds of infrastructure are connected to the internet and thus threatened. Traffic lights, financial flows, water supply, transportation, pipelines, railways. If everything is connected, then anything can be attacked. Richard Clarke was the counterterrorism chief to Presidents Bill Clinton and George Bush. Today he's known as the American Chief of Cyber Defense. In other words, the father of the U.S. cyber warfare program.
So I think there are a number of things that we can assume major nation states can do today. There are about 30 countries that have cyber military units or cyber intelligence units. What can they do? They can probably turn off the internet in other countries. They can probably turn off a lot of telecommunications. They can probably turn off electric power. They could probably cause trains to derail. They could probably confuse air traffic control and perhaps confuse airlines so that airlines have to stay on the ground. They could probably get into banking systems and move money from one account to the other or out of the country. They could probably get into stock markets and manipulate the trade of stocks back and forth. Now, President Bush in 2003 decided that the United States would not ever go into banks and move money around because he had the choice of going in and getting Saddam Hussein's money. And he was persuaded by the banking people in the government that if you do that once, no one will ever trust the banking system again. So, although we could do it, we don't. We don't manipulate stock markets, but that's possible as well. Now, the interesting thing about cyber war that a lot of people don't understand, they think it's ones and zeros fighting each other in some fourth dimension. But it can also cause physical things to blow up. If you take over the control system for a railroad, you can cause a train to derail. That's not in cyberspace. That's in real space. You can cause a pipeline to explode, much like the pipeline exploded in California last year, where the computer control system malfunctioned and opened up a valve. A huge amount of gasoline came out, natural gas came out, and then ignited. Burned down 38 houses, killed 5 or 6 people. That was because of a computer malfunction. But it proves what I've been saying all along, which is you could do this to a pipeline intentionally.
Plane crashes must also be added to this list. In 2008, an aircraft crashed in Spain because of an ordinary virus that prevented the detection of a technical failure. But what worries Americans most, it's at the heart of modern life: electricity. The giant electrical power grid, power lines, transformers, power plants are all connected to the internet for maintenance. The US electrical power grid is monitored 24 hours a day here at FERC, the official body responsible for regulating energy. For the past several months, its director, John McClelland, has warned against the risk of a cyber attack.
In the United States, there are 3 interconnections. There's an eastern interconnection. All the balancing authorities, utilities are tied together. And so they instantaneously produce and consume power. There's the Texas interconnection. Texas is by itself. And then the western interconnection. Sophisticated and coordinated attack on a power grid, an interconnected power grid, would be simultaneous in nature. It wouldn't be an attack that would be perpetrated one generator at a time. Multiple generators may be hit all at once. If the generators are hit and they're damaged and destroyed for a prolonged period of time, the utilities would have to wait until replacement equipment arrives. Until the replacement equipment arrives, it's commissioned and put into service, their citizens are out of power. It could take quite a while to restart facilities, in the order of days. If it's a smaller attack, it could be weeks, months, or even longer if it were a larger attack and equipment was permanently damaged or destroyed. So a large coordinated attack would be devastating.
A widespread multi-state blackout would indeed be an economic, political, and humane disaster, although it would be difficult to fully measure the consequences. Telephone, transportation, ATMs, hospitals, America would be completely paralyzed. In 2003, the historic 2-day Northeast blackout cost $10 billion. Yet the authorities have had the greatest difficulty in forcing power companies to secure their electrical grids. Longtime NSA agent Stuart Baker is the former number 2 of the Department of Homeland Security.
I think the vulnerability is in part because many of these industrial control systems have never been tested by cyber criminals because there's nothing to steal. Why don't we disconnect them? That's also a good question. The internet is an enormously cheap way to interact. It succeeded because it was easy to join, and all of the proprietary networks, which were more secure, were hard to join and cost money, and no one wanted to pay for the money.
The interesting thing is if you talk to the people who run the railroads and the pipelines and the electric power grid, they will tell you they're not connected to the internet. Technically, that's true. The control system for the pipeline is connected to the company's internal network, and the company's internal network is connected to the internet. People don't even know what devices are connected to cyberspace. Most people don't think when they get into an elevator in a modern office building that that elevator is connected to cyberspace. And it's talking back to the manufacturer, telling it how it's doing, when it needs maintenance, if any problems have come up.
In a time of a crisis, the very expensive security network is not yet a priority and is actually behind schedule. And so race against the clock begins. Because a massive enemy computer attack that targets the electrical power grid or other infrastructure is now far from being just an academic hypothesis. The US electrical power grid's complex network is regularly infiltrated.
Most of the infiltrations of power grid networks and perhaps other industrial control systems is reconnaissance, and the reconnaissance is aimed in the end at carrying out sabotage. And so I think what we're seeing is the very beginnings of a kind of cyber war in which lots of different countries and military forces are asking themselves if we wanted to, could we bring down power in this country? And let's put ourselves in a position where if we choose to, we can do it. And I suspect that we'll see a kind of arms race in which people say, I want to be able to bring down a power grid in this country, and when the authorities in that country say, there's been so much reconnaissance, we believe that our adversaries are thinking about bringing down our power grid, the only thing we can do is infiltrate their power grid, and that way we can threaten them with the same kind of disaster that they're threatening us with. When we asked particular security officials who they were most worried about in terms of the countries they were most worried about, cited China overwhelmingly.
China, an adversary that is of utmost concern to America. Armed with countless weapons to wage cyber warfare, China has devised a cyber warfare doctrine designed to achieve global electronic dominance by 2050. Tensions mount in April 2009 when anonymous official sources reveal that China has introduced a virus into the US electrical power grid as a stark warning. And that's not all. The US must also deal with cyber espionage. In August 2010, the US government accuses the Chinese of being behind a vast network of hacked computers that targets the American government and American businesses.
The United States will protect our networks. Those who disrupt the free flow of information in our society or any other pose a threat to our economy, our government, and our civil society. Countries or individuals that engage in cyber attacks should face consequences and international condemnation.
No one has ever really gone to the Chinese and said, this sort of behavior is inappropriate, this sort of behavior has to stop. And the US is not the only target. We've seen the GhostNet network, for example, which pursued the Dalai Lama, but it broke into the computer networks of more than 100 countries, right? So China has been found in French networks, in German networks, in British networks, in NATO networks. Well, it's a complicated situation, and a lot of the complication is on the Chinese side. So it's easy to say what the US and China do at a very high level. Both of them intrude into each other's computer networks, right? The differences are the US does not engage in economic espionage. And an easy way to think about it is, what do the Chinese have that we would want to steal?
Tension, mistrust increases even more when hackers steal millions of US military plans for the most ambitious military project ever conceived, the ultra-modern fighter aircraft F-35.
There's a debate about what they took. Did they take the secret information? Did they take unclassified information? But I think it's possible, I think it's even likely, that many weapon systems, like the F-35, have been penetrated. There are hundreds of millions of lines of code involved in a new fighter plane. A new fighter plane these days, or even a new Airbus, is just a flying device filled with computers and code. And it can't fly without those computers. It literally can't fly without those computers. So let's imagine the F-35 someday goes up against another country, and the other country's airplane is flying at it, and instead of firing a missile, it sends out a message which gets into a back door of the F-35's computer system and tells it to shut down the engine, or tells it to dive. I don't think that's a crazy idea. I don't think that's a science fiction idea. I think that sort of thing is not that hard to do.
For now, the cyber war between America and China is limited to sporadic guerrilla warfare rather than a widespread cyber conflict. With the interdependence of economies, it's not clear that China has an interest in shaking up the US economy. It remains to be seen what China's intentions really are. So we went to ask a Chinese journalist, an expert on the mysterious workings of Beijing's ruling elite.
The Chinese leaders treat internet as a double-edged sword. They understand internet can be a weapon, can be used as a weapon, because they can develop technology and to get some information through the cyber world. But they also are very fearful, because to the outside world they can use as a weapon, but to the inside domestically, they treat internet as a very big threat to them. They are afraid of people getting organized, and internet can be used as a very effective organizing tool, and we see the power of Facebook, Twitters in the Arab world. Now we just see the new budget from the Chinese government this year, and the new budget, you know, the money they spend on the policing is more than defense budget. That is quite telling.
Today, there are more internet users in China than in the US. Contrary to US fears, doesn't China have more to lose than gain by engaging in an all-out cyber war? There is currently, all over the world, an atmosphere that resembles a sort of cyber Cold War. So what can be done? Given the risk of devastating cyber attacks, network protection seems to be the most logical answer. And that is precisely what most countries are doing, at a cost that goes into the hundreds of millions. But here's the problem. A virus like Stuxnet, which easily breached high-level network security, would cost only a few $100,000.
Military experts use a phrase called offense preference, which means that the offense can spend a little bit of money and get a capability. But to stop that offense, you have to spend a huge amount of money on the other side. We really don't have the technology today to stop these attacks. The cyber espionage attacks that are going on every day, are almost always successful. And we can't stop them. So if we can't stop cyber espionage, how are we going to stop cyber war? It's almost the same thing. The difference between cyber espionage and cyber war is a few keystrokes.
How then to react when a cyber attack can easily outmaneuver any network security system? In the fog of this new form of war, the new strategy must be something completely out of the box. And it's not a coincidence that the Pentagon has hired a former nuclear war specialist, Martin Libicki, to develop a whole new strategy. Because a cyber attack is a weapon comparable to the atomic bomb.
With cyber, the primary reason the deterrence policy is difficult is because we have to understand who's doing what to whom. There are so many ways that I can carry out an attack that do not reveal myself, that the odds that you're going to be able to have an attack and not know who did it are very high. If the odds are high, your ability to retaliate is going to be very low because you won't have the confidence to know that you're doing the right thing. You might make a mistake. In other words, I thought it was North Carolina, but it was South Carolina that did it, okay? And now I have two enemies, the guys who did it and the guys that I struck back. So the question becomes, particularly for the Western countries, is do you want to start a mode of warfare that other people can start against you? In theory, we have the capability of turning out the lights in Beijing, yes. In practice, I don't know, because I don't know what the vulnerabilities of their systems are. But would it be a wise idea? I think we'd have to think several times before we go ahead and answer the question yes.
It's not even a question of trying to balance out the terror threat. Rather, it's the uncertainty. Cyber war is unpredictable, unstable, explosive, prone to spinning out of control at any moment. Faced with these dangers, the solution could very well be an international ban. Ironically, that's what the Russians support. Yet, they're the ones who launched the first cyber war in history against Estonia. We're in Munich. It's the end of 2010. General Rogozin approaches NATO waving the white flag, explaining the fear that gripped Moscow over Stuxnet. He addresses NATO member countries, proposing a treaty to outlaw cyber attacks. The idea is taken very seriously because states are facing a new reality. They no longer have a monopoly on war. Today, almost anyone can launch a cyber attack.
Iran, North Korea, if they had nothing to lose, if they had no investment in the world economic system, or a terrorist group. So far, we haven't seen terrorist groups doing this sort of thing, thankfully. But someday a terrorist group might decide, let's destroy the American economy by a cyber attack. Now, the terrorists might not know how to do that, but they can hire hackers. A lot of the very sophisticated European hackers, East European hackers, are available for hire.
A lot of the scenarios, the best movie for this is still the Die Hard 4 with Bruce Willis, right, where you had mad hackers taking over the world and you had flaming cars and crashes and burning buildings. That would be really cool if you could do that, but you can't, right? So it's all bogus. It's all made up, right? And what can you do with a cyber attack? You can destroy some critical infrastructure. That's what Stuxnet showed. Or you can erase data, or you can confuse people. But it's not going to be this drama that we so often hear about. Doesn't mean they will always reject it. And one of the things that's interesting to me is one of the new groups, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, has begun to talk about using cyber attacks to disrupt the American economy. They're pretty smart. You could probably do that. And once they get the capability, I expect they'll try and use it. That's why we need to improve our defenses.
Paradoxically, this may actually be something very positive. The risk of a cyber attack from non-state actors is something that will bring countries together instead of placing them in a situation where they fear each other. States, governments, military structures will have a common problem instead of having a problem with a state rival or adversary. A diplomatic agreement, though, remains uncertain. The threat is now very real. Because never in history has a weapon been abandoned once it's proven to be so effective. This latest cyber war battle concerns all of us. In the face of very real threats, there's the risk that the internet, this wonderful instrument of knowledge, freedom, and communication, could go back to being primarily a military tool. In the United States, some want to give the Pentagon the responsibility of controlling the civilian internet, or even take it completely down in case of an attack, to the point that Obama himself had to intervene.
Let me also be clear about what we will not do. Our pursuit of cybersecurity will not include, I repeat, will not include monitoring private sector networks or internet traffic. We will preserve and protect the personal privacy and civil liberties that we cherish as Americans.
The utopian Wild Web is perhaps all but a memory. The internet is now taking us into a brave new world of invisible wars that, like it or not, will have very visible consequences.